Let's take a second to review some of the concepts that we learned in the previous module where we focused on energy and did a little bit of an introduction to cellular respiration. And during this review, I think it's going to be important for us to start with the recycling aspect of ATP. And this was discussed in the previous module, that recycling of ATP, that addition of a phosphate group onto ADP is very important because our body, our cells just don't have the ability to remake ATP every single time we utilize or hydrolyze an ATP molecule. So when we're looking at the ATP, recycling, I'm going to put ATP, that high chemical energy molecule, on the top of the screen. Now, ATP has a lot of potential energy. It has a ton of stored potential energy, and this is the fuel for our cells' proteins. We can hydrolyze ATP into ADP and a free phosphate. And we're just going to use this kind of universal symbol for a phosphate group, a P with a circle on it, and that's just representing it's a free phosphate group not attached to another molecule. Now, because ATP has high chemical energy, so this is high chemical energy associated with it, and this is due to the 3 negatively charged phosphates that are covalently bonded next to one another. And in comparison, after we hydrolyze ATP, we have essentially molecules that have a lower chemical energy. And this represents an exergonic reaction. An exergonic reaction is where energy is released, and this is released during the hydrolysis of ATP, breaking that terminal covalent bond in the ATP molecule. So I'm going to represent this energy being released as a wavy line. And we know from our previous module that this energy is necessary for cellular work. So our cellular work are examples of endergonic reactions. They require energy. So this could be transport work, like we've seen in a previous module, where we're moving substances against their concentration gradient, requiring energy, requiring ATP. This could be chemical work, the synthesis of macromolecules, like associating amino acids by covalent bonds, requiring energy. And this can be also mechanical work. And we're going to see this in several different ways coming up when we look at cell division, and the movement of chromosomes throughout the cell as a cell divides is going to need energy, need ATP, and is an example of mechanical work. So it doesn't matter if we're talking chemical, transport, or mechanical. They're all types of cellular work. They are all classified as endergonic because they require energy, and that energy is ATP, our cell's fuel. All right. Now, ultimately, we talked in the last module that we're not going to remake ATP every time we use it, every time we hydrolyze it, but instead we can add that phosphate back onto ADP to generate ATP. Now, if we're going from lower chemical energy reactants, ADP and phosphate, to higher chemical energy products, which is ATP, this is considered an endergonic reaction. This is going to require energy, an input of energy, to generate these higher chemical energy products. So I'm going to represent that as a wavy line. Right? We need energy to go in to drive that endergonic reaction. And in this case, that energy is going to come from the breakdown of glucose. In our topic of this module, which is cellular respiration. So as we break down glucose, we are going to release energy, and that energy is ultimately going to drive the production of ATP. Now, these are examples of energy coupling. Remember that energy coupling is that the energy released from an exergonic reaction is going to drive an endergonic reaction. Overall, cellular respiration is an exergonic reaction. We have this slow release of energy through multiple chemical reactions that ultimately drive that endergonic reaction of the production of ATP. So when we look at this recycling kind of visual of ATP, we can see that there is one side here that represents energy coupling, and we also have another example of energy coupling over here. So these kind of different sides of the circle represent different examples of energy coupling. So the energy released in the exergonic reaction of cellular respiration is going to drive the endergonic production of ATP. And in addition, the hydrolysis of ATP is an exergonic reaction that's going to drive our endergonic cellular work. Now, I think it's important to kind of take this 30,000-foot view to see the overall process together and the importance of cellular respiration, because it is required to make that ATP to do our cellular work. But in this module, we're going to specifically focus on cellular respiration and look at the various steps to see how ultimately ATP is produced in our cells.